why should I allow that same God to tell me how to raise my kids who had to drown his own? This quote by Robert Greene Ingersoll was the first time that I ever came in contact with somebody who hated the story of Noah's Ark. And that's funny, at least to me, because as a kid who grew up in Sunday school and going to a private Christian school my entire life, I can say with complete confidence that I never felt strongly about the story of Noah's Ark one way or the other. It was never a story that I disliked, but it was also never one of my favorite Bible stories. It just isn't that exciting to me. I mean, most of the story is spent on a boat. I mean, actually, an entire year is spent on a boat, and they don't do anything except for send out a dove to go and check if there's land. And the first time the dove comes back with nothing. It's not an exciting Bible story, and it's surely not as exciting as the story of David and Goliath, or the story of Esther, or the story of Jonah and the whale, even though Jonah is not really a great guy. It's still just not as exciting a story. That is why I was so kind of surprised when I first came in contact with this quote. I want to say when I was 13 years old, because again, I was like, I'd never heard somebody feel that strongly about the story of Noah's Ark. But Mr. Ingersoll wasn't alone. A lot of people from that point on, I heard a lot of people reference the story of Noah's Ark, especially in arguments over why they felt like Christianity was not the right religion. Why they felt like there was no God in general. And again, I brought up Mr. Ingersoll's quote because I felt like it was a good representation of what the argument entails. It is basically saying that the God of the Bible is not a God that is worth following. He is not a good God at all. He's not a benevolent, kind, loving God. Because if he was a benevolent, kind, loving God, he surely would not have drowned all of his children. And you can imagine how tough of an argument this was for 13-year-old Miriam. It was a pretty tough argument, and I didn't have that. I mean, I don't even know if I'd really read the Bible up until that point, so I surely kind of didn't know how to combat these tougher arguments. And so I didn't. I kept it in my back pocket, but I really didn't know how to answer it. That is, until 3 years later, when one of my best friends actually asked a similar question while we were in Bible class. And one really cool thing about our Bible classes at my school, again, a Christian school, was that they were completely centered around the subject of apologetics. And so nearly every class period, if not like every few class periods, we were probably in a super heated debate about a super polarizing topic in culture. And, you know, that's the thing about like really polarizing topics. Everybody has a strong opinion on them. And so not only is it really hard to have a conversation, it's really hard to find a middle ground because oftentimes there isn't one. But that's what we did in our Bible classes. And I loved our Bible classes for that very reason, because I'm the kind of person who, well, everybody wants to be right, but I'm kind of a know-it-all, so I really kind of prided myself on like being right, and so I loved Bible class. But anyways, one day we were in Bible class, and I don't even know what we were talking about. I don't know if it was a hot subject or not, or if it was a hot topic or not, but I do remember, however, that one of my really good friends, raised his hand, and he asked the same question that Robert Greene Ingersoll asked, which is, how could God kill his children? And I could tell that I was not the only one who was stumped by that question, by sheer virtue of the fact that nobody else in the classroom raised their hand. Everybody else in the classroom was quiet. Even my teacher was quiet. And all of us kind of were stumped by that question. It's just a really tough question to answer. Our conversation moved to a different topic, as conversations tend to do. And all of a sudden, my friend's hand shoots up again. And this time, he asked an even tougher question, which is, how could a loving God allow so much evil in the world? And it was at this point that I kind of started to get annoyed with my friend. Even though I love them to death and I've known them for a super long time. I was just like, oh my gosh, really, bro? Like, you had to ask two of the toughest questions ever. Because those are two of the toughest questions ever. Not just for a teenager. They're the toughest questions for any person who's a Christian. They're really, really tough questions to answer. And I couldn't answer them. And again, that killed me as somebody who really, really prides myself on knowing information and having information. But I don't know, I just sat there. I was like, I can't answer that question. All of a sudden, something happened. And God spoke to me. I didn't hear an audible voice or anything like that. I feel like when God speaks, it's kind of more so a thought that you didn't think. Like, it's something that a conclusion that you wouldn't have come to yourself. And so I was just sitting in class, and all of a sudden, I hear God say to me, "What do they want from me?" It was at that moment that I realized that not only had my friend asked two of the toughest questions any Christian can encounter, he had also asked two questions that were contradictory to each other. The second question that he asked is known in philosophical terms as the problem of evil, and it is kind of best summed up by the question, how could a loving, benevolent, and kind God not end the evil in the world? How could a good God allow so much suffering to happen every single day? And there's actually a pretty famous quote by a Greek philosopher named Epicurus that goes along with this, where he basically says, "Is God willing to prevent evil but not able? Then he is not omnipotent. Is he able but not willing? Then he is malevolent. Is he both able and willing? Then whence cometh evil? Is he neither able nor willing? Then why call him God?" And I also remember seeing that quote a while back, and it's really popular for a reason, because it's a good quote. And yeah, basically the entire idea behind the problem of evil is that God allows unnecessary human suffering to occur. He is not a loving God because he allows people to experience pain and suffering day in and day out when he has the power to stop it. But do you guys see the contradiction yet? You see, the story of Noah's Ark is a story about God destroying evil. In fact, it's not just a story about God destroying evil. It's a story about God wiping evil off the face of planet Earth. Right? He is so disgusted by what the people in Noah's time are doing that the Bible says that he was sad that he had ever even created them. And he sends a flood to get rid of them. Because the Bible also says that those people were so wicked and evil that every inclination and thought from their heart was of evil things. In other words, they never had a thought that was not rape, murder, violence, pillaging, or causing pain to other people. The story of Noah's Ark is a story about God getting rid of evil and suffering. And yet, when you bring up stories like that of Noah's Ark, or even other stories in the Bible where God kills the Canaanite nation, or God punishes the Israelites for their sins, the first thing that somebody says is, how could God kill his own children? What do you want from him? I can show you verses in the Bible where God murders evildoers, where he kills them in the most extreme and brutal ways possible. I can also show you verses in the Bible where God shows mercy to millions of people who do not deserve it. But every time I bring up verses in the Bible where God shows mercy, people ask for wrath. They ask for him to get rid of the evil in the world. And every time that I bring up verses in the Bible where God shows wrath, people ask for mercy, and they say how terrible he is for killing his children. So which one do you want? Do you want God to show mercy to everyone and give forgiveness to even the worst sinners? Or do you want God to get rid of everyone? My mother used to always tell me that the God of the Bible was the ultimate gentleman. He will allow you to choose him, and he allows you not to choose him. He gives every single person free will. And you can do whatever you want with that free will. You can choose to love him and serve him and give your life to him. Or you could choose not to love him and not to serve him and not to give your life to them. He doesn't force himself upon us or make us love him. Just like a gentleman does. He leaves us alone if we ask him to leave us alone. But more than that, he honors the consequences that come from us rejecting him or following him, which is ultimately the real problem with the problem of evil, and also the problem with why people don't like the story of Noah's Ark. It's because the people who argue these things often start the argument with the presumption that people are inherently good. And this is a secular view of the world, because this goes completely against biblical teaching. The Bible is very clear about the fact that people are not inherently good. In fact, people aren't even mostly good. We're not even 50-50. In fact, the Bible says that we are inherently evil. In other words, our default setting is wickedness. When left to our own devices, we resort to murder and anger and pillaging and you name it. Those are the things that we do. And this is of the utmost importance because it completely changes the argument for the problem of evil. Why? Because we are the problem. The world is the way it is because of our decisions. None of it is God's fault. He allowed us with free will to choose what kind of world we wanted to live in. He allowed us to choose with free will whether we would love him or whether we would hate him. And the world that we live in today is the product of our choice. Human history is the product of our choice. It is the product of us choosing time and time again exactly what Adam and Eve chose in the garden. To be their own gods. To choose for themselves what was right and wrong instead of listening to what God had to say about it. God is not the reason why sex slavery exists. That was evil men. God is not the reason why 1 in 6 women have been sexually assaulted. That was evil people. God is not the reason why a person would open fire on a group of students in their own high school. All of those terrible things were done by evil people. God is not the reason why neighborhoods aren't safe. All of that was because of evil human beings. All of that was because of people who are exercising their free will choice to either follow God or become their own God. God is a good father. A good father does not just clean up his children's mistakes. He allows us to sit in the slop that we made. He allows us to experience and live with the consequences of our actions. One of my college professors put it like this: the reason why Christianity is the largest religion in the world, the reason why it stretches across cities and cultural boundaries and language barriers, the reason why so many people from all over the world believe in our God, is because Christianity acknowledges something that few other religions do, and yet something that deep down every human being knows. Something is broken, something is wrong, and we need someone to fix it. All of this brings me back to my original question. Why does everybody hate the story of Noah's Ark? Especially if the story of Noah's Ark is an example of God getting rid of evildoers. I'll tell you why. Because we as human beings cannot bear to think that we are the reason for why the world is the way it is. In fact, it is much easier for us to instead blame God for our own decisions. Thank you.